Please, don't let Uncle Victor take me. The boy's voice cracked like glass in Naomi Brooks's ears. For a second, the entire emergency room around her seemed to disappear beneath the cold fluorescent lights and distant ambulance sirens echoing through downtown Chicago. Lucas Calloway clung to her arm with trembling fingers, his small body shaking beneath the oversized gray hoodie someone from hospital staff had wrapped around his shoulders. He wasn't crying loudly. That was the terrifying part. His fear was quiet, deep, the kind that lives inside people long after the danger passes. Naomi looked down at him, confused at first, until the automatic hospital door slid open and a tall man stepped inside, wearing a navy cashmere coat worth more than Naomi made in 6 months. Ethan Calloway, billionaire founder of Calloway Dynamics. The man every business magazine called untouchable. His jaw was tight, his blue eyes sharp enough to cut through steel. 2 private security agents followed behind him, while nurses instantly straightened their posture the second he entered the hallway. But none of that mattered to Lucas. The moment the boy saw Ethan's brother, Victor Hale, walking beside him with a calm smile and polished silver cufflinks, Lucas grabbed Naomi harder. "Don't let him near me," he whispered. Naomi felt something cold move through her chest. Victor stopped walking for half a heartbeat when he noticed the boy's reaction. Just long enough for someone observant to notice. And Naomi had spent her entire life noticing things rich people hoped others ignored. 3 hours earlier, she had just been another invisible waitress carrying champagne through the grand ballroom of the Blackstone Crown Hotel. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead like frozen waterfalls while Chicago's skyline shimmered through 70-foot glass windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The room smelled like expensive whiskey, perfume, and money old enough to buy silence. Naomi moved quietly between billionaire investors and politicians who barely looked at her face when they handed over empty glasses. "Another bourbon, sweetheart. Watch the suit, girl. Smile more." She had heard every version of it before. At 27, Naomi Brooks knew how to survive rooms where people with power treated service workers like part of the furniture. Her black uniform was pressed perfectly, her hair tied neatly into a low bun. Her expression calm even when exhaustion sat behind her eyes after a 14-hour shift. But that night felt different the moment she noticed Lucas Calloway standing alone near the ballroom exit. The billionaire's son didn't look like a child enjoying a luxury gala. He looked like a kid trying not to panic. His small shoulders stayed tense. His eyes kept darting toward the security elevators. Twice, Naomi saw him flinch when Victor Hale walked too close. Then came the moment she couldn't stop thinking about. Lucas approached her quietly while she adjusted silverware near the dessert station. He slipped something folded into her hand without looking up. A note. Tiny handwriting. Shaking letters. "If someone says my dad sent them, don't believe it." Naomi's pulse stumbled. Before she could even kneel down to ask what was wrong, every light inside the parking structure suddenly went black. Somewhere below the ballroom, tires screeched. Then came the sound no one in that hotel would ever forget. A child screaming for help. The scream ripped through the underground parking structure so sharply that even the valet attendants froze beside their podiums. Naomi dropped the silver tray in her hands and ran toward the sound before her brain could catch up with her body. High heels clicked against concrete behind her as guests crowded near the ballroom entrance, confused but unwilling to get too close. The lower garage level was drowning in darkness except for the pulsing red glow of emergency backup lights flashing every few seconds like a warning heartbeat. Somewhere ahead, tires screeched again. Naomi turned the corner just in time to see a black Cadillac SUV idling beside a service elevator with both rear doors open. 2 men in dark jackets were pulling Lucas Calloway toward the vehicle while the boy struggled hard enough to lose one of his sneakers on the wet pavement. "My dad did not send you," Lucas shouted, panic cracking his voice. One of the men immediately looked around after hearing that. Not angry, nervous, like the plan was falling apart too fast. Naomi noticed details automatically. The fake security badges clipped upside down. The earpieces with no wires attached. The way neither man looked at the child like trained protection agents would. They looked at him like cargo. "Hey!" Naomi yelled before fear could stop her. The sound echoed violently through the garage. Both men turned toward her at once. For half a second, everything stopped. Rainwater dripped from exposed ceiling pipes. Engines hummed somewhere above. The city thundered faintly beyond the concrete walls. Then one of the kidnappers stepped toward Naomi calmly, almost professionally. "Private family matter, ma'am," he said. "Please return upstairs." But Lucas shook his head wildly. "No. Naomi, please." Hearing her own name from the billionaire's son hit her like cold water. The man nearest the SUV reached toward Lucas again, and instinct took over. Naomi grabbed a metal valet cart beside her and shoved it hard across the slick pavement directly into the path between the men and the vehicle. The crashing sound exploded through the garage. One of the kidnappers stumbled backward while Lucas twisted free just enough to run toward Naomi. She caught him by the shoulders and pulled him behind her. Her pulse hammered so violently she could hear it inside her ears. "Run to the stairwell," she whispered. "Now." But before either of them moved, the overhead emergency lights flickered again, revealing another figure standing near the far concrete pillar. Victor Hale. Dry suit. Perfect posture. Not surprised at all. Naomi felt her stomach tighten immediately. Most people would have looked shocked seeing an attempted abduction unfold in front of them. Victor only looked irritated. "Lucas," he called out calmly, like a parent scolding a child at a grocery store. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." The boy's breathing turned ragged beside Naomi. "Do not let him take me," he whispered again, barely audible now. Victor started walking toward them slowly, expensive Italian shoes splashing through shallow puddles across the garage floor. "Naomi, is it?" he asked smoothly. "I appreciate your concern, but my nephew is overwhelmed. Family tensions. You understand." His smile never reached his eyes. Somewhere deep inside, Naomi realized something terrifying. Lucas had not been trying to escape strangers. He had been trying to escape someone he already knew. Then one of the fake guards suddenly reached for the child again, and this time Naomi did not think. She grabbed Lucas's hand and ran straight toward the service corridor as the sound of footsteps thundered behind them through the dark. The service corridor smelled like bleach, cold metal, and burnt coffee from the hotel kitchen 2 floors above. Naomi could barely hear her own breathing over the pounding footsteps chasing them through the darkness behind. Lucas clutched her hand so tightly his fingernails pressed into her skin. The boy was trying hard not to cry, but every shaky breath betrayed him. Emergency lights painted the narrow hallway in flashes of red as they pushed through a heavy steel door leading toward the lower storage level. Naomi's non-slip shoes slid slightly across the wet concrete floor, but she never loosened her grip on Lucas. "Keep moving," she whispered. "Do not stop." Somewhere behind them, a man shouted into a radio. Another voice answered. Calm, organized, not panicked at all. That frightened Naomi more than yelling would have. These men were prepared. They knew the building layout. They knew security response times. And worst of all, they knew exactly where Lucas would be tonight. Naomi shoved open another door leading into the hotel's industrial freezer section. The cold hit instantly, sharp enough to sting her lungs. Towering shelves of boxed produce and frozen meat lined the room beneath flickering fluorescent lights. She pulled Lucas behind a stack of supply crates near the back wall, just as footsteps thundered past outside the freezer entrance. Silence followed. Heavy silence. The kind that makes people hear every heartbeat inside their own chest. Naomi crouched beside the boy, trying to steady her breathing. "Lucas," she whispered carefully, "I need you to tell me the truth. Why are they after you?" The child looked down at the floor first. Children always did when the truth scared them. "Because I heard something," he finally said. "A few weeks ago." Naomi stayed quiet. The distant hum of refrigeration units vibrated softly around them, while freezing air curled through the room like smoke. Lucas rubbed his shaking hands together. "My dad and Uncle Victor were fighting in Dad's office," he continued. "They thought I was upstairs." His voice cracked slightly. "Uncle Victor said the company was going to collapse if Dad did not sign something." Naomi frowned. Callaway Dynamics was worth billions. Every news channel in America talked about Ethan Callaway like he was unstoppable. Companies like that were not supposed to collapse. "Then what happened?" she asked softly. Lucas swallowed hard. "Dad told him no." Uncle Victor got really angry. He said if Dad kept choosing me over the company, everything would fall apart. Naomi felt a chill that had nothing to do with the freezer air. Choosing me over the company. Those words stayed in her head. Somewhere outside the storage room, a door slammed open. Both of them froze instantly. Footsteps again. Closer this time. Lucas lowered his voice to almost nothing. Last night Uncle Victor came into my room after dinner, he whispered. He told me tomorrow would be scary, but it was the only way to protect the family. Naomi stared at him. Did you tell your father? Lucas shook his head quickly. Dad barely sleeps anymore. He is always working or arguing with people on the phone. The boy looked painfully small saying it. Not angry, just lonely. Naomi suddenly understood something most people in that ballroom upstairs never would. Lucas Calloway was not growing up inside a family. He was growing up inside an empire. Somewhere beyond the freezer walls came the sound of approaching voices again. One of the kidnappers spoke first. They cannot have gotten far. Then another voice answered calmly enough to stop Naomi's blood cold. Victor Hale. Find the waitress first, he said. The boy trusts her now. Lucas immediately grabbed Naomi's sleeve harder. And in that terrifying moment, Naomi realized she was no longer hiding from strangers. She was hiding from a man powerful enough to control the entire building around them. Naomi pressed her hand gently over Lucas's mouth the second the freezer door handle rattled. Both of them held their breath as shadows moved beneath the thin strip of light under the steel door. The refrigeration fans hummed overhead while freezing air curled around their ankles like icy fog. Naomi could hear her own heartbeat so loudly she thought the men outside might hear it too. Check inside, one voice muttered. Another answered immediately. Victor said not to damage anything down here. Cameras are still running in this section. Naomi's eyes narrowed. Cameras. That meant Victor was worried about evidence, not Lucas's safety. The realization settled heavily in her stomach. The freezer handle suddenly jerked halfway downward before stopping. Someone on the other side cursed under his breath. It is locked. Naomi looked up instinctively toward the old industrial latch above the door. Rusted, bent, probably jammed from years of overuse. For once, luck had chosen their side. Footsteps slowly faded down the corridor again. Lucas finally exhaled shakily against her hand. Naomi lowered it carefully. We cannot stay here long, she whispered. If they cut the power, this room becomes a trap. Lucas nodded quickly. His cheeks were pale from the cold. Naomi removed her black server jacket and wrapped it around his shoulders despite the freezing temperature biting through her own thin blouse instantly. Listen to me, she said quietly. When we leave this room, you stay directly behind me no matter what happens. Understand? Why are you helping me? Lucas asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. Naomi blinked at him. Because you are a kid, she answered softly. And because somebody should. The boy looked down at the floor after that, like he was trying very hard not to cry again. Naomi felt something crack quietly inside her chest. Children who grow up surrounded by money usually knew how to ask for things. Lucas sounded like a child who was surprised kindness still existed. Somewhere above them, the muffled sound of shouting echoed faintly through the ventilation. System. Security teams. Police maybe. The hotel upstairs was probably collapsing into chaos by now. Naomi carefully pushed herself upright and scanned the room. Industrial supply shelves. Frozen inventory. Emergency exit map near the rear maintenance corridor. Her eyes locked onto one detail immediately. A service tunnel connecting the freezer section to the loading docks near the alley behind the hotel. Come on, she whispered. We are getting out through the back. They moved quietly through the narrow aisle between stacked food containers while the fluorescent lights flickered weakly overhead. Naomi's fingers stayed locked around Lucas's wrist the entire time. Halfway across the room, Lucas suddenly stopped walking. Wait, he whispered. Naomi turned instantly. The boy pointed toward a security monitor mounted high near the loading inventory station. Grainy black and white camera feeds cycled slowly across the screen. Parking garage. Ballroom elevator. Service entrance. Then Naomi saw it. Victor Hale standing alone beside the loading dock 10 minutes earlier. Calm. Speaking directly to the fake security team before Lucas was ever approached. Her stomach dropped. Lucas noticed her expression immediately. You see, he whispered shakily. Naomi nodded once. Hard. The truth was no longer suspicion. It was sitting right in front of them on camera. But before either of them could move again, another image appeared on the monitor that froze Naomi completely. Ethan Calloway had just entered the hotel security command room upstairs surrounded by armed private protection agents. His face looked carved from stone. Furious. Controlled. Dangerous. Then the camera feed switched again. and Naomi saw Victor stepping toward Ethan with concern painted perfectly across his face, while security officers pointed toward a blurry image of someone running through the garage. Naomi. Lucas looked at her in horror. He is blaming you, the boy whispered. And for the first time that night, Naomi realized saving Lucas might have just made her the most hunted person inside the entire hotel. The loading dock behind the Blackstone Crown Hotel looked nothing like the glittering ballroom. Upstairs, rain hammered the pavement hard enough to blur the alley lights into streaks of gold and white across the soaked concrete. Delivery trucks sat abandoned beside stacks of wooden pallets while steam rose from street vents into the freezing Chicago night. Naomi pushed open the rear service door carefully and scanned the alley before stepping outside with Lucas hidden behind her. Every instinct in her body screamed that they were running out of time. Sirens echoed somewhere downtown now. Not close enough yet. Lucas stayed glued to her side, clutching her jacket tightly around his shoulders while his eyes darted nervously toward every passing shadow. Naomi reached for the emergency employee phone mounted beside the dock entrance and dialed hotel security directly. Blackstone emergency line. A man answered instantly. "My name is Naomi Brooks," she said quickly. "I have Lucas Calloway with me. He is safe," but the line went silent for half a second. Then the man's tone changed completely. "Stay where you are," he said sharply. "Security teams are already searching for you." Naomi frowned immediately. "Not searching for Lucas. Searching for you." Before she could answer, another voice suddenly exploded through the phone speaker in the background. "That is her. Keep her on the line. Ethan Calloway." Even through static, his voice carried the kind of authority that stopped rooms cold. Naomi's stomach tightened. "Mr. Calloway, your son is safe," she said carefully. "Please just listen. Put Lucas on the phone." Ethan snapped instantly. Not angry. Controlled. Somehow worse. Naomi handed the receiver down to Lucas carefully. The boy hesitated before lifting it toward his ear. "Dad." His voice came out small. For the first time all night, Naomi heard something break inside Ethan Calloway's silence. Relief. Raw and immediate. "Lucas," Ethan breathed. "Are you hurt?" "No." Lucas glanced up at Naomi. "Naomi saved me." Another pause followed. Heavy. Complicated. Then Ethan spoke again, colder this time. "Stay where you are. My security team is coming." The line disconnected immediately after. Naomi lowered the phone slowly. Rainwater dripped from her hair onto the concrete while anxiety twisted tighter inside her chest. Something felt wrong. Security should have been focused on protecting Lucas. Instead, every move upstairs seemed centered around finding her first. Lucas noticed her expression instantly. "He trusts Uncle Victor," the boy whispered. Naomi looked away toward the dark alley entrance. "I know." Headlights suddenly turned the far brick wall white. An SUV rolled slowly into the alley toward them. Black, tinted windows. Naomi immediately stepped backward, pulling Lucas behind a parked catering van. The vehicle stopped 20 feet away. Two men stepped out wearing private security jackets with the Callaway Dynamics logo stitched across the chest. One raised both hands calmly. "Mr. Calloway sent us," he called out over the rain. Naomi studied them carefully. Professional posture. Real badges this time. But fear had already sharpened her instincts too much tonight. "Then why are there no police with you?" she asked loudly. The men exchanged a glance. Too quick. Too nervous. Lucas gripped Naomi's sleeve harder. "They are lying," he whispered immediately. One of the men started walking toward them. "Ma'am, we do not have time for this." Naomi's pulse surged. Every survival instinct inside her screamed at once. Then another set of headlights flooded the alley from the opposite side. This time the vehicle stopping behind the SUV belonged to Chicago police. Doors flew open. Uniformed officers stepped out quickly with flashlights cutting through the rain. And standing behind them beneath a black umbrella was Ethan Calloway himself. Tall. Silent. His expression unreadable beneath the flashing red and blue lights reflecting across the wet pavement. Victor Hale stepped out beside him seconds later, looking directly at Naomi with the same calm smile that terrified Lucas inside the garage. Then one of the officers pointed straight at Naomi and said the words that made the entire alley suddenly feel ice cold. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us immediately regarding the attempted kidnapping of Lucas Calloway." Rain hammered against the alley hard enough to drown out half the city, but Naomi still heard the metallic click of handcuffs being pulled from an officer's belt. The sound sent a wave of disbelief through her chest. She stood frozen beside the catering van while flashing police lights painted the soaked pavement in violent streaks of blue and red. Lucas immediately stepped in front of her before anyone could move closer. "No," the boy shouted, his voice breaking. "She saved me." Several officers exchanged uncertain glances. Ethan Calloway remained completely still beneath the umbrella, his face unreadable as rainwater rolled from the edges onto his expensive black coat. For a man who controlled billion-dollar negotiations without blinking, he suddenly looked like someone struggling to understand which version of reality was true. Victor Hale stepped forward first, calm as ever. "Lucas," he said gently, "everyone is scared right now. The police just need to ask her some questions." The boy shook his head violently. "You are lying," he yelled. "I saw you in the garage." The alley went silent except for the rain. Victor's expression flickered for only a fraction of a second before settling back into smooth concern. Most people would not have noticed it. Naomi did. "Lucas has been under a lot of stress lately," Victor said carefully, now looking toward Ethan instead of the police. "After everything with the company and the custody discussions, his imagination has been running wild." Naomi frowned instantly. Custody discussions. Ethan's jaw tightened almost invisibly at those words. There it was. Another crack beneath the perfect billionaire image the world saw on magazine covers. The Calloway family was already breaking apart long before tonight. "That is not true," Lucas shouted again. His breathing turned uneven now. Panicked. "Uncle Victor told me tomorrow would be scary." One police officer lowered his flashlight slightly. Another glanced toward Ethan uncertainly. But Victor stayed composed. Too composed. "Lucas," he said softly, "you are confused." Naomi finally stepped forward despite the officers surrounding her. Her soaked uniform clung to her arms from the freezing rain while exhaustion pulled heavily at every muscle in her body. "He is not confused," she said firmly. Ethan's eyes snapped toward her immediately. Sharp. Intense. Naomi forced herself not to look away. Most people lowered their eyes around powerful men like Ethan Calloway. That was how power survived. But she had spent the last 2 hours running through dark hallways protecting his son, while everyone else with authority had failed him. "Your son handed me a note before the kidnapping," she continued carefully. "He was terrified before any of this started." Victor let out a quiet breath through his nose, almost amused. "Convenient," he murmured. Naomi ignored him completely. "There are security cameras in the freezer corridor downstairs," she said. "You should check them." That got Ethan's attention. His expression shifted slightly. Not trust. Calculation. "What cameras?" Victor asked immediately. Too quickly. Naomi noticed it at once. So did Ethan. The billionaire slowly turned his head toward his brother-in-law for the first time since arriving in the alley. Rainwater slid down Ethan's face while the police lights flashed across his cold blue eyes. "You told security that entire section was offline," Ethan said quietly. Victor smiled faintly. "That is what I was informed." But something had changed now. Tiny. Dangerous. Ethan Calloway was no longer looking at Naomi like a suspect. He was looking at Victor like a puzzle piece that suddenly no longer fit. Then Lucas stepped closer to his father, trembling hard beneath Naomi's jacket. "Dad," he whispered, "please believe her." Ethan stared down at his son for several long seconds. The boy's fear was impossible to fake now. Raw. Deep. Personal. Finally, Ethan lifted his eyes back toward the officers surrounding Naomi. His voice came out low and controlled enough to silence the entire alley instantly. "Nobody touches her," he said. The alley fell into stunned silence after Ethan Calloway spoke. Even the officers nearest Naomi lowered their hands slightly, uncertain now about who they were supposed to protect and who they were supposed to suspect. Rain continued crashing against the pavement while distant thunder rolled over downtown Chicago like something massive shifting in the dark. Victor Hale recovered first. Men like him always did. "Ethan," he said calmly, stepping closer beneath the umbrella. "This is exactly how emotional decisions get people hurt." Ethan never looked away from Naomi. "My son is terrified of you," he replied quietly. Victor gave a soft laugh under his breath, almost disappointed. "He is 8 years old. And smarter than most adults in this alley," Naomi said before she could stop herself. Several heads turned toward her instantly. For a moment, The only sound came from rain striking metal dumpsters beside the loading dock. Naomi felt every eye on her now. Police, security, billionaires, men with power who normally would never even remember the face of a hotel waitress. But she had crossed too far into their world tonight to disappear quietly anymore. Ethan finally shifted his attention toward her completely. "Tell me everything," he said, not as a command, as a father running out of certainty. Naomi swallowed carefully. "The men who grabbed Lucas knew the garage blackout schedule before it happened," she began. "They knew exactly where security blind spots were located. They also knew the private family elevator code." One of the detectives frowned immediately. "That information is restricted," he muttered. Naomi nodded once. "Exactly." Victor folded his arms slowly. "Or perhaps someone overheard it during event planning." Naomi looked directly at him. "Then why did the fake security team report directly to you in the garage before Lucas disappeared?" Victor's expression tightened almost invisibly. Tiny. Fast. But Ethan saw it this time. Naomi knew because the billionaire's posture changed immediately beside the police cruiser. Something colder entered the air around him. "You are making dangerous accusations," Victor said softly now. "Against family." Naomi took a slow breath. "No," she answered. "Against the only person who seemed more interested in controlling the narrative than finding the child." The detective beside Ethan looked toward Victor carefully now. "Sir, where exactly were you during the blackout?" Victor smiled faintly, trying to help contain panic upstairs. "That is not what the freezer cameras showed," Naomi replied. Victor's eyes snapped toward her instantly. There it was. The first real crack. Lucas stepped closer to his father again. "Dad," he whispered shakily. He kept saying the company needed a new leader. Ethan slowly removed his gloves one finger at a time, never taking his eyes off Victor now. The movement looked calm, controlled. But Naomi suddenly understood why entire industries feared this man. Ethan Calloway did not explode when angry. He became quieter, more focused, more dangerous. "Bring me the freezer footage," Ethan told one of his security directors immediately. Victor stepped forward sharply. "There is no reason to turn this into a public spectacle. A child was almost abducted," Ethan replied coldly. "It already is." Another uncomfortable silence spread through the alley. Rainwater dripped from Victor's silver cufflinks, while police radios crackled softly nearby. Then Naomi noticed something strange. Victor's right sleeve had shifted slightly when he crossed his arms. A luxury watch gleamed beneath the fabric. Black dial, silver rim, distinctive scratch near the edge of the glass. Naomi's eyes widened instantly. She had seen that watch already tonight. Reflected briefly in the garage security monitor while Victor spoke to the kidnappers before the attack happened. Her pulse surged. "Wait," she whispered suddenly. Everyone looked at her. Naomi pointed directly toward Victor's wrist. "That watch." Victor instinctively lowered his sleeve too late. Ethan frowned immediately. "What about it?" Naomi stared at the scratched silver edge, her mind connecting the final piece with terrifying clarity. "I saw it in the garage security footage before Lucas was taken." Victor's calm expression disappeared for the first time all night. Victor Hale's composure cracked, so slightly most people in the alley would have missed it entirely. But Naomi saw the exact moment his confidence slipped. His hand moved instinctively toward the scratched watch beneath his sleeve before stopping halfway. A reflex. Human. Dangerous. Ethan noticed it too. The billionaire's eyes lowered slowly toward the silver watch reflecting beneath the flashing police lights. Rain rolled down. Victor's face now, but for the first time all night, he no longer looked perfectly in control. "That is impossible," Victor said carefully. "Thousands of people own watches like this." "Not with that scratch," Naomi answered immediately. Her voice stayed calm even though adrenaline thundered through her chest. "It caught the freezer monitor light when you spoke to the fake security team in the garage." One of the detectives stepped forward. "We need that footage now." Victor's jaw tightened. This is absurd. But Ethan was no longer listening to him. The billionaire looked toward his head of private security with terrifying focus. "Get every backup file from the garage and freezer systems," he ordered, including deleted data. The security director hesitated only a second before nodding quickly and stepping away to make the call. Victor saw it happen. Naomi watched the calculation change behind his eyes immediately. Men like Victor survived by controlling information. And for the first time tonight, he was losing control of it. Lucas moved closer to Naomi again while thunder rolled overhead. The child looked exhausted now, pale beneath the alley lights, but his eyes never left Victor. "I told you," he whispered softly to his father. Ethan finally looked down at his son fully. Really looked at him. Naomi saw something painful move across the billionaire's face then. Guilt. Deep and immediate. Not because Lucas had almost been taken. Because his son had been afraid for a long time, and Ethan had not seen it. "How long?" Ethan asked quietly. Lucas swallowed hard. "Since Mom left." The words hit harder than the rain. Victor immediately stepped in again. "Ethan, this is not the place." "Be quiet," Ethan said softly. The alley froze instantly. He never raised his voice. He did not need to. Victor stared at him in disbelief. Ethan Calloway had defended him publicly for years through lawsuits, scandals, boardroom fights, and investor wars. But now something fundamental had shifted. Family loyalty was colliding with the fear in his son's eyes, and fear was winning. One of the police detectives suddenly pressed a hand against his earpiece. "We just got the restored garage footage," he announced. Everyone turned instantly. The detective looked down at the tablet being handed to him by another officer. Rain struck the screen while the video loaded shakily. Grainy black and white footage appeared first. The garage blackout. The SUV. Then Victor stepping into frame clearly beside the fake security agents minutes before Lucas was grabbed. Naomi heard someone curse quietly under their breath. The detective zoomed closer. Victor was visible handing one of the men an access card directly from his own pocket. Silence crashed through the alley heavier than thunder. Ethan stared at the screen without blinking. His face looked carved from ice now. "Ethan," Victor said quickly, stepping forward, "listen to me. This was supposed to be controlled." Naomi felt Lucas tense beside her instantly. "Controlled," Ethan repeated quietly. Victor ran a shaking hand through his wet hair for the first time all night. "The board was preparing to remove you," he said desperately now. "You were distracted. Weak. Ever since the divorce, the company has been bleeding investors. I needed leverage to force the emergency restructuring vote." Naomi stared at him in disbelief. Lucas looked completely frozen. Victor looked toward Ethan with something close to panic now. "Nobody was supposed to get hurt," he insisted. Lucas was never in real danger. But Ethan's expression changed the second those words left Victor's mouth. Something inside him finally broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like trust collapsing under its own weight. Then Ethan stepped between Victor and his son for the very first time that night. 6 months later, the ballroom of the Calloway Foundation looked nothing like the freezing alley where everything had fallen apart. Warm gold light spilled across polished marble floors while a string quartet played softly beneath crystal chandeliers towering over downtown Chicago. Cameras flashed near the stage as politicians, investors, journalists, and nonprofit leaders filled the room dressed in black tuxedos and designer gowns. But the most talked about person that night was not a billionaire. It was the woman standing quietly near the back entrance adjusting the sleeve of a navy blue blazer she still was not fully used to wearing. Naomi Brooks paused for a moment before stepping into the crowd. 6 months earlier, most people in rooms like this would have walked past her without remembering her face. Tonight, conversation stopped when she entered. Not because she demanded attention, because she had earned it. The story had exploded across every major news network in America within 48 hours of Victor Hale's arrest. The billionaire executive accused of orchestrating his own nephew's staged abduction to seize control of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Investors called it one of the biggest corporate scandals in recent Chicago history. But the public focused on someone else entirely. The black waitress who saved the child everyone with power failed to protect. Naomi still hated interviews. She hated cameras even more. But she had accepted one thing after that night. Invisible people often see danger first because nobody bothers hiding it from them. Across the ballroom, Lucas spotted her immediately. "Naomi." The boy sprinted across the room before security could even react, throwing his arms around her waist hard enough to make several guests laugh softly. He looked different now, lighter somehow. The fear that once lived constantly behind his eyes had faded into something closer to peace. Naomi smiled and knelt slightly to straighten his tie. "You look expensive tonight," she teased gently. Lucas grinned for the first time all evening. "Dad picked it." And he complained the entire time, Ethan Calloway said behind them. Naomi looked up slowly. Ethan stood a few feet away in a tailored black tuxedo, hands folded calmly in front of him. But he no longer carried the same cold distance she remembered from the hotel. Some people become harder after betrayal. Ethan had become quieter, more human. You clean up well too, Naomi replied carefully. A faint smile touched the corner of Ethan's mouth before disappearing again. There is someone here who wants to meet you, he said. Naomi frowned slightly until Ethan stepped aside. Behind him stood 3 young women and 2 teenage boys wearing foundation badges around their necks. These are the first scholarship students for the Brooks Initiative, Ethan explained. Naomi blinked in surprise. The Brooks Initiative was the youth protection and crisis response program Ethan had funded after the kidnapping attempt. It provided emergency support for vulnerable children across Chicago. Naomi still had not fully accepted that her name was attached to it. One of the teenage girls stepped forward nervously. Miss Brooks, she said softly, I just wanted to say thank you. Naomi looked confused. The girl smiled shyly. People like us do not usually get protected in stories about rich people. The words hit harder than Naomi expected. Across the ballroom, guests slowly began taking their seats as the gala program prepared to start. Ethan looked toward the stage, then back at Naomi. You know what bothers me most? He said quietly. That night, my building had armed security, private surveillance, former military contractors, and a room full of powerful people. He paused briefly, but the only person my son actually felt safe with was the woman everybody else ignored. Naomi looked down at Lucas standing beside her. The boy reached for her hand naturally now, without fear. Somewhere beyond the ballroom windows, Chicago glowed beneath the dark night sky, while cameras flashed and billionaires shook hands beneath chandeliers worth more than most houses. But none of that felt important anymore. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in a room is not power. It is the assumption that power automatically means protection.